is the film Children of Men from 2006. This is a movie directed and co-written by Alfonso Cuarón and starring Julianne Moore, Clive Owen. The IMDb plot summary: in 2027, in a chaotic world in which women have somehow become infertile, a former activist agrees to help transport a miraculously pregnant woman to a sanctuary at sea. First off, I do this kind of every year where I go back and sort of try to fill in gaps of directors that I like that I've never seen their earlier work. So I did in January do that with Alfonso Cuarón. So I had never seen a lot of his earlier Mexican films. This movie then I had to go watch because it's my favorite one of his
Hmm.
films. So I rewatched it earlier in the year. And the biggest kind of reason why for me this is my number one film is 2027 that they show in this film to me felt even more so, like incredibly prescient. And the themes of this movie too around nihilism and doomerism and all these things and how really just absolutely in a terrible state the world is, even more so this year than in years past. I mean, there's obviously horrible wars going on in the Middle East, climate disasters like we've never had in the United States. I think the second most like billion-dollar climate disasters have happened, killed 500 people across the US. Things seem to be looking worse and worse, and we're definitely trending in a downward direction, in my opinion, just as a species. That there will be a bottom, but it's not going to happen anytime soon, unfortunately. And it's very easy, at least for me, to sometimes get caught up in the mentality that a lot of people have of like, okay, what's the point? The planet's going to burn and we're all going to die, and all these, horribly nihilistic things, which I think going back to something that you had said earlier, it's like, what's the point, right? Shrug and kind of give up. I think it is easy sometimes to fall into that trap. And
Hmm.
I have to be constantly reminding myself, which is again the theme of this movie, is there is hope at the end of this.
Hmm.
And what does that mean? And you have to find that in your life somehow, whether it's through family or friends or a passion. Maybe it's cooking, like in the taste of things that we had, something that you enjoy that you can hold on to as everything else is sort of crumbling, but then think that there will be something better at the end of this. There's a political bookstore that I like to go to, and there was sale for posters one day, and a lot of these posters were like, oh, all the sorrows in the world, and things about all the people that have been killed by our economic system, and all these sort of things. But I bought the two of them that were the optimistic, there will be a brighter future, and this great quote by one of the Black Panthers just talking about how one day this will all be over, and these repressions we're under, there will be freedom at the end of this, and that is what I decided to buy that day because I do really want to try to have this revolutionary optimism and thinking, yeah, it is recognizing that things are definitely trending in a very bad direction everywhere, but that doesn't mean that can affect you. Even when it comes to your own personal life, like this is a very hard year for me, just on a personal level too, that I do dealing with a lot of different things that were hard to get through. And sometimes it's easy, much like Clive Owen's character in this movie too, who was hurt by a personal tragedy of his child passing away, to give up and turn your back on things. But
Hmm.
I just believe you have to find things in your life that are those good things and then look ahead to maybe it might not be next year, it might be the next 10 years. My opinion is more like the next 50 or 60. But at the end of that, this will be a better world, and there will be more happiness and joy that is spread around. So I'll get more into the film and what the movie, kind of how they represent that. But that to me is why this was the movie that I will always remember 2024 about, because it's that trying to find the optimism and just the total blackness of the society and the world that we live in today and will be living in, I think, maybe even for the rest of our lives. But the next generation then something will turn around. It will get better. And I'd have to keep reminding myself of that.
Yeah. And I would sort of watching this movie, I've seen this before for sure, but watching this movie, especially in this year, but in concert with the movies that I brought, which is that you actually don't have to wait for the next generation because every little brighter spot of kindness or personal passion or whatever little deed we do, we actually make things a little bit better just in the moment, you know?
Hmm.
And it's all those little moments which actually add up to bigger things. I really believe in that, and we've been saying throughout this entire podcast to like just show up first
Hmm.
of all and be kind as much as you can. I think we have a lot of power actually in humanity to not just make like big changes that would be impacting future generations, but just little things day to day. And it's actually the little things that lead to big change. I don't really think of one fine day like a big sweeping change is going to happen. It's all incremental, it's all gradual. So if I keep that mindset, it's actually not that dark because we're not doomed. We are
Yeah.
doing things even today or can do things even today to just make things better. It doesn't have to be a big grand gesture.
Right, or it can sometimes. I mean, it's
or
like
it
it's
can.
it's like both can happen. Is sort of I think
Right,
where I try to remind myself of. You
right,
want the big things, and sometimes
right,
they happen out of nowhere that are a big
right,
surprise, and all of a sudden, boom! Like, okay, something big happened, and this is a positive step. Or it can be a lot of smaller things, even just in your
right,
own personal life, or just thinking about things you can do to help with other things going on in the world in some way. Because every little thing, if everyone does something little, it sort of adds up to something bigger. And it's easy to lose sight of that. And I think sometimes too, like the whole doom pilled, black pilled, whatever you want to call it, of these people that
hmm
are just nihilists, essentially, like that is what the people in control want. They want you to give up
right,
and sort of like just roll over and keep getting it like as you've been getting it for, however long it is. So the victory of not being nihilist, I think, is getting one over on them anyway, too. Not giving up no matter what. I mean, no matter how bad things look and how bad things are, which they are, you have to recognize that too. But if you keep your head up and try to find that joy somewhere, like that is a victory in and of itself. Which I
totally,
think this movie it does it in a dramatic fashion, obviously,
right.
because it is a big film about a lot of big things. But I think that is what I always take away from this film. And maybe we should get a little into the film. So
Hmm
you'd seen the movie before. Like, this is my favorite
Yeah,
of his films, and
I
the
think
more I
it's
go
his best.
the
I
more I go
think.
back to it, the more I just appreciate it just as a cinematic work. But
Yeah.
then, like I said, I think it just becomes more and more prescient in terms of the things that we face and the challenges we face in the world today.
Yeah, and I love it how it captures that. Of course, it's a hard watch, it's a thrill ride. It actually reminded me a lot of Civil War, a movie that we were sort of mixed on
Oh yeah, I didn't
this
like that film.
year.
Yeah.
But it kind of this is how, again, not to put the two against each other, but like this to me is like a way more successful way of capturing that. It has
Hmm.
different themes and messages on its mind, obviously, but it still reminded me of that. It's propulsive, and there's something about setting this movie and these themes in this kind of futuristic but yet very relatable kind of world that
Hmm.
somehow lands in a very different way, where it makes it very tactile, that you can see it. And because it's in a near future, it sort of has, I don't know if you felt this, but watching it this time, it made me think of, oh, this could be placed at any point in time in the history of mankind. Because,
Right, right, right.
and
The
that
story.
sort of
Yeah.
is the story. But I think the visual and the setting of that kind of helps with that, because this world, which feels sort of relatable, but also different, this could be 1800s or 20,000s or 3,000. It could be any time, right? Which sort of makes the point that these things that this movie is talking about, which we are dealing with now, people have been dealing with these for millennia. They always will. Yeah, sometimes things will get worse, sometimes things will get better, but this will keep happening. And it is upon us, like you said, that we have to show up and have that hope. And it's true. If you look back at history, this has always been happening in some form or the other. It might be worse now. Some might argue it was worse. I mean, imagine going through the world wars. What was that like? Or imagine going through massive plagues. What
Right.
was that like?
Hmm.
So it kind of, I don't know, universalizes all this, but also shines just the power of hope and humanity, that we've been through this.
Yeah, setting it in a, near distant future back in 2006, where it does
Yeah.
feel present but a little bit not.
Removed.
Right,
Yeah.
right. Is a great way, I think, to not put too much distance between the themes and the modern world we're living in. Like sci-fi, what's so great about it is, yeah, this could be set
Exactly.
on Mars in the year 4000, whatever, and tell the exact same story, and then you can read an allegory into, oh, this is sort of like what it is today. But I think this movie is trying to be like, no, this is basically today, or it will be very
Right.
soon. So to try to like make sure to drive the point a little bit more home, I think that was. I mean, it's based on a book, so it obviously wasn't the screenplay that did that. But they could have set, to your point, they could have reset the book in whatever time they wanted. I don't even know when the book came out.
It
Maybe it
still
came
work.
out in earlier decades, and it still works. But it's just interesting in terms of a lot of the, especially with what's going on, bring back to the elections and the issue of, I think fake issue of immigration that we have in this country right now. And basically both parties are fighting over who could be more mean to immigrants. And the person that won is promising to do exactly what is shown in this movie, which is round up people in camps that are not from the specific country that this is England in the film.
Mm.
But that is what essentially the political candidate who won the presidential election is saying, oh, I want to do children of men here. And so people were like, okay, cool, let's do that, without maybe even realizing what it looks like. But I was watching this movie being like, oh yeah, like this is what that might look like if it happens, or would look like if it does in another time. And it hits more to me in terms of like the
Mm,
doomerism part of it, because Clive Owen's character even says like, oh, what is it, there's some line in the movie he says about like, oh, it doesn't matter, the world is shit anyway. In the beginning he's
mm,
totally disengaged from everything. He just kind of
yeah,
walking through life like a zombie. And there's a great scene too with his cousin. I think it's his cousin where he goes and visits him in the old like water tower from the Pink Floyd album. And his cousin's basically just been collecting all this art and also sort of
yeah.
like, who cares? Like completely
He's just
given
living
up
in the
too.
past.
Living in the past, right? Just holding on to this stuff that doesn't matter. Like who cares? Because
Yeah,
when the humanity dies out because no one's having kids anymore, who cares that you have this, Michelangelo's David? And he's like, oh, I
right,
just try not to think about it. And there are definitely those people. I think that is
right,
the complacent people, which are like, yeah, the world's going to shit, but like I'm just gonna pretend it's not and just continue on doing
right,
what I want to do. Like, no, like you shouldn't do that. You should do something,
right.
about it and not just sort of hide off on some ivory tower. But what I like about the movie is that it does it very subtly. Like it's not really coming out and saying that or like poo-pooing this
Not
person or making them
speechifying.
into
Yeah,
or speechifying it at all. It's just sort of there.
yeah,
And you're like, oh, this is kind of interesting. And Clive Owen's evolution too into realizing like he should be trying to save potentially maybe the first of the hopefully beginning of the world being repopulated again. But I love the theme of
yeah.
like the population stopping, because that is a definite like end to the human race. Whereas the
Right.
things we're talking about now, with climate change, all these things, I don't think those are necessarily ends to the human race, but they're major threats to it. But it gives you
Hmm.
that same feeling of like, well, we have no future, which in this world they literally don't. But in our world, there are a lot of people that say, oh, we have no future. It's almost like people stop giving birth anymore in terms of the way that some people walk through the world just dealing with all this bad stuff. And I just again I like that this movie pushes back against that. And and
Right.
and Clive Owen's character does too, even though he dies in the end probably. I think the ending is just so amazing where it just kind of cuts the black and you hear children, like
Yeah.
laughing and stuff. It's like, oh, he did
Yeah.
it.
It's very powerful. Yeah. It's very powerful, very moving. And then, of course, we would be remiss if we didn't mention the car scene, which is
Oh my God,
obviously
yeah.
iconic from this movie, where your breath is just taken away, stopped. It's an out of body experience. Even though I watched it before, just watching it again this time, it was just like, oh my gosh, like how did they do this?
Hmm.
But you're not thinking about that when you're watching it. It's the day after. I was like, how did they do this? But
Yeah.
in the moment, you're just completely swept away.
Yeah, there's that set piece when they're in the car and under attack, and then the end of the film when he's going through the concentration camp, and
Right.
there's the army kind of coming in and fighting against these rebels, and it's a long, I think it's maybe like a 10-minute shot or something like that. Through that, it's just also completely harrowing. I mean, it transports you into that sense of destruction kind of all around you, and you understand more like what Clive Owen is going through, just the way that they shot that. It's just he is, we covered Gravity on this podcast at 1.2, and just another example of him just being able to use the techniques of filmmaking and get emotion out of you and how he's doing it.
Yeah,
Just he's one of our true like masters for sure. And I think this movie again is the best he's ever made so far. I mean, hopefully he'll make another amazing film soon. But those two scenes always stand out. The craft in this film is just unbelievable, just
totally.
unbelievable.
Totally. And like you said, in service of the story, in service of the characters, and really evoking super strong emotion from you, but not in an indulgent way, even though it is very showy. Of course it
Right,
is.
right.
But for some reason, because it's in service to all those other things, it doesn't feel that way. It doesn't sort of stick out that, okay, here we go,
Hmm.
scene time, here we are. It doesn't feel that way. It feels earned. It builds up to it.
Yeah, and I think something you said earlier too about the movie being like kind of propulsive and moving, like
Yeah.
this, it's like getting on a ride and just keeps going. You sort of, it doesn't draw attention to these things because it's in a way it's kind of like a chase movie, sort of,
Yeah.
and how Clive Owen gets kidnapped and then they're getting chased throughout the rest of the film once he sees the woman pregnant to try to get her to this boat, and that I think makes you those scenes that could be very showy, like you said, not feel that way because the movie just keeps moving and moving and moving. It's not
Right.
drawing, oh, this is a big set piece, and now let's sort of relax afterwards and feel the moment of the emotions from that because you're right on to the next thing. Like you can't think about that car scene to your point because there's immediately
No,
something else is happening.
there's no
Immediately something else
time.
is
You're dead.
happening.
You'll be dead.
Right? Exactly. Yeah.
I
It
mean,
just
you feel that as an audience, like to your
right,
point. Like, you
right.
can't think about the past.
Yeah, and I also appreciate that this movie, speaking of the indulgent piece too, like could have been long, and it's not. It's like under two
Mm,
hours. It's almost like an hour and a half, kind of. There's not a
mm,
lot there to it, which definitely this could have been a 3 hour movie
Bloated.
about some epic of the end of, but no, it's like very tight and lean. And I also
Yeah.
love how he's able to be so economical in that. I think that helps also get away with some of these, more showier things that could have stood out in a 3.5 hour movie or something, which just would not have been as good. Like the story just sort of stripped down to the bare bones of what exactly needs to be said and not big speeches, overindulgent, put you over the head with it. It's just a one
Yeah.
character going through this arc of being a nihilist and then finding hope and then doing something about it and then being
Right.
happy that he did at the end. I mean, I think
Yeah.
he's like, great, I did what I was supposed to do, even though
Yeah.
he is probably dead. I think it's
Yeah.
pretty much he doesn't make it, but humanity makes it because she makes it to the
Humanity
boat.
makes it, exactly. No, I
Yes, you
couldn't agree more. Like, this is just such a tight movie, and that's why it's so powerful and impactful. Otherwise, it would lose the meaning. And frankly, it wouldn't be true to its themes and the time period and what it's trying to say. Because in a world like this, there wouldn't be time to sit around and talk.
right,
It
right.
just wouldn't make sense.
Yeah, we couldn't sit around and have a podcast. We have to keep moving.
No.
Hi there, it's Alex. If you like the review and discussion Karan and I just had, make sure you subscribe to our channel, Movies That Shaped Us, to get full episodes. Every other Wednesday, Karan and I review a new release and then discuss 6 other movies made by that film's actor or director and how they shaped us. Subscribe right now or follow our podcast on Spotify or Apple Podcasts via the link in the description below. Hope you join us for the journey.